Hey everyone, welcome back to Be the Hope. We're Thursday of Holy Week. We have officially entered into the three most holiest days of the entire year, and they are known as the most sacred and holy Paschal Triduum. It's a time where we get to dive so deeply and so intimately into the final days of Jesus' life. And today I want to focus on the beginning of this big liturgy that we celebrate. And it's technically only one liturgy from tonight and the Mass of the Lord's Supper all the way through the Easter Vigil. It's one liturgy. And it's so beautiful. And Holy Mother Church just rocks because there's, even in the general instruction for the Roman Missal, they have just many different scenarios of, like, if it's just a priest without people there, or if it's just a priest with a couple other ministers to celebrate, or if it's the whole congregation. So, like, even in this time of pandemic, the celebrations will still go on, right? Like, we still will go into this time and it will still be very, very holy for us. And so Holy Mother Church is just on top of it. Literally, the gates of hell will not prevail. Jesus is still here. He will still come. Nothing is going to stop him. Anyways, let's dive into the Mass of the Lord's Supper here. I could spend hours talking to you about this, particularly about the Eucharist, but I'm not going to. We're going to just give you some high points, and we'll go from there. Just points for you to reflect on as you enter into this sacred Triduum. So at the Mass of the Lord's Supper, it's probably one of my favorite Masses. The first time I experienced it a couple years ago, I'm pretty sure I sat there and sobbed the entire time. It's just absolutely beautiful. But during this Mass, during the Lord's Supper, because it's a true representation of what happened at the Last Supper, Jesus institutes two things. He first institutes the priesthood. So he institutes our ministerial priests through the act of holy orders. He basically tells them, commands them, to do this in memory of me, to go out, to shepherd people, to lead people. And when you gather together to celebrate the meal, do this in memory of me. So he graces them, he gifts them, and he institutes this priestly order, the priesthood that we know today, that has been passed down for generations and generations, and it will continue on for generations to come. The priesthood, and through the gift of the priesthood, we have the gift of the Eucharist, and we have the gift of the other sacraments too. So Jesus institutes the Eucharist at the Lord's Supper. I have a very, very strong devotion to the Eucharist, and I could sit here and talk for hours on the Eucharist, but just some key points here and how meaningful this is for us. At the Last Supper, when Jesus was there, he makes reference back to, he fulfills what he says in John 6, that unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life within you. At the Last Supper, Jesus does something that has never been done before. And he speaks the words of institution. He says, "Take this, all of you, and eat it, for this is my body, which is given up for you. Do this in memory of me." He literally says the words, "This is my body." And at that moment, the piece of bread that he is holding no longer is just a piece of bread, but truly his body. And he does the same with the cup of blessing. He does the same with the chalice. Now, it's so beautiful. In Jewish tradition, they celebrate the Passover meal. And in a traditional Passover meal, there are four cups of wine. And if you've ever participated in a Seder meal, you know what I'm talking about. If not, I encourage you to participate in a Seder meal. The first cup that you partake in during the meal is the cup of sanctification. The second cup that you partake in is the cup of judgment, or the cup of deliverance, remembering God delivering the Israelites out of Egypt. The third cup is then the cup of blessing. Now, I just said Jesus takes the cup and he blesses it. Jesus and his disciples have reached a point in the Passover meal where they were celebrating a traditional Jewish Passover meal, but they've reached a point where Jesus institutes a new blessing. He institutes the new law. He institutes the new covenant. Because when he blesses this cup, he knows that it's the cup of blessing. He blesses it by saying, "Take this, all of you, and drink from it. This is my blood." It's the blood of the new and eternal covenant that will be poured out for you and for many for the forgiveness of sins. Do this in memory of me. So at that moment, things change for all of mankind. Through the power of the priesthood that is instituted, on this Holy Thursday at the Last Supper. And through the power of the Eucharist and this new blessing and this new covenant, we now have the true source and summit of our faith, which is the Eucharist, that we are called to partake in every time we gather for Mass. And if you noticed, the words that I spoke are actually the words of consecration that the priest would say. The priest says the very words that Christ tells them to speak, to consecrate the bread and the wine, to consecrate the cup of blessing. And to seal the deal, there's the fourth cup. On the night which is in Jewish tradition is the cup of consummation, right? It's the cup of redemption. On the Last Supper, they didn't partake in a fourth cup. That is why when we celebrate the Paschal mystery, it's one big liturgy. It doesn't end on Holy Thursday. It continues through Good Friday because Jesus and his disciples didn't finish the meal. They didn't finish. After the cup of blessing, after Jesus institutes the Eucharist and confers upon the apostles, like, you must continue to do this. You must continue to bring the Eucharist. You must continue to show my physical presence here on earth. Jesus goes out into the Garden of Gethsemane. And he prays, Lord, let this cup, if you be your will, pass from me. The cup of consummation, the cup of redemption, because real love requires sacrifice. And Jesus knew that. Jesus knew that he was going to pour out his blood as a sacrifice. And so when Jesus is hanging on the cross, the true cup of redemption, the true fourth and final cup, comes when he says on the cross, it is finished. And the soldier pierces his heart with a lance, and blood and water flow through. So that seals the deal for us for all eternity. It seals the deal for this new and eternal covenant that we get to partake in every time that we gather for Mass. So something to think about as we pray the Mass of the Lord's Supper tonight, and as we celebrate Masses from here on out too, every day, if we go to Mass every day or when we gather on Sundays, is to remember back to the Last Supper, when Jesus not only confers upon the priests, to the newly ordained priests at that moment, he confers upon them the Eucharist. And he says, to do this in memory of me. Partake in this. Because when we truly partake in the body and blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus, the source and summit of our faith, we are not only united to every other Christian and every other Catholic in the world, but we're united so intimately to Jesus because that is his body, blood, soul, and divinity. You look at the Eucharist, you look at that white host, that little white host, and that is proof that Jesus is living. That's proof of the resurrection. So what he does on Holy Thursday and what is finished on the cross in Good Friday with the fourth cup of consummation is the very thing that we partake in every time that we gather. And so my challenge for you and my invitation is for all of us to reflect more deeply. What does the Eucharist mean for us? How can we more deeply enter into the sacred Paschal Triduum? And even though we can't physically receive the Eucharist at this point, how can we more spiritually unite ourselves to that? Because what he did for us is truly this wonderful, beautiful gift. Like I said, I could continue talking for a long time on that, but I hope I gave you some points to think about. Know of my prayers during this time. May the Lord richly bless you, that we may draw deeper and closer to him in this most holy and sacred time. God bless.